how's it going? My name is Jeff with the Collector Car Network, and today we're going to be looking at this, the 2022 Lexus LC500h, which is an awesome blend of leather, carbon fiber, and possibly the best looking vehicle currently on sale by Lexus. But before we get into all of the details of this vehicle, first a quick word from our sponsor.
Today's Auto Hunter Cinema video is brought to you by LandAirSea. Keep tabs on all your valuable assets from the palm of your hand. Remember, with LandAirSea, theft is temporary. Visit LandAirSea.com to order your LandAirSea GPS unit for your classic vehicle.
Okay, so today we're looking at the 2022 Lexus LC500h, which the H, of course, actually means hybrid. The LC500 initially came with a V8, but this one is paired with a 3.5-liter V6 hybrid multi-stage system that we'll get into later. But let's go ahead and let's start by looking at the exterior of the vehicle. In this case, our car is finished in ultra white, and our car is actually a Lexus LC bespoke build, which means it does have some extra special options and things that were kitted out on the Lexus website to make this a very nice, one-of-a-kind vehicle, and it has some special options that we'll look into in the interior that show what all's been done to the car. The ultra white color looks fantastic. It has a little bit of metallic flake into it that makes it look very standoffish. But one of the things you'll notice that makes this different from other cars is this Lexus badge on the front. So one of the things that Toyota Lexus will actually do is they'll add a bit of bluing around the badge. And what that bluing actually means is that this is in fact a hybrid. So that's kind of a cool moniker, because when you look at the striking appearance of this car, it is a very good looking car. As I mentioned earlier, possibly the best looking car currently on sale in the whole Lexus bit. And the funny part about the LC500h being the hybrid is if you go to Lexus's website, you can actually find this car both in the performance section and you find it in the hybrid section of what vehicles are available. So that's kind of a fun fact. But let's talk about our car specifically. So we've got this awesome ultra white on the exterior, but we have these wheels which look absolutely fantastic. These are actually an alloy, and these are 21-inch wheels. The standard factory option is 20, so these have been upgraded, and they hide these massive, awesome aluminum brakes. This features a huge brake set which has been added on, and you need it because this car weighs a lot. This car does come in at around 4,400 pounds, so it's pretty heavy, but the brakes actually bring it to a pretty quick stop, so that's really impressive. Next, we have a carbon fiber roof. So this is the first of many carbon fiber features. This is a gloss carbon roof, which stands out, and this was an option. This is added on. It looks absolutely fantastic, and it's gonna help accent some of the other carbon we have on the exterior as well. Coming around to the side here, these actually pop out. So currently, when you see the door handles in like this, that means the car is actually locked. And if you go ahead and push this in, go and unlock it, you even got a little Lexus badge, and you can go ahead and open your door, which is a pretty neat touch, where again, you'll find more carbon fiber, but we'll get into the interior later. So we have a really nice silhouette, sort of fastback style. And then we have our first sign, another sign I should say, of the hybrid system. Right here we have a multi-stage hybrid, which stands for the whole system that they have, and we'll get into the drivetrain specs later of what really multi-stage means for the hybrid system. And again, we've got our 21s in the rear as well. This is actually a staggered setup. These are a little bit wider in the rear here, but we have those aluminum alloy wheels that look really good. One of my favorite 21-inch wheel options that are available for this car, and the most expensive coincidentally. The car we're looking at today here actually comes in around $115,285 as tested. The base LC500h actually comes in around $99,000. So not a cheap car, and obviously ours is very heavily equipped, including what I'm going to move on to next, which is this wing back here. So not only do we have the carbon fiber roof, we have a carbon fiber wing. This wing looks absolutely fantastic. One of the things that's cool about this is that this is the highest trim level is to get this wing option. You can actually buy the LC500 either with no wing, you can buy it with a active aero wing, which pops out at speed, or you can get this, which is a step above the active aero wing, and it looks great. I love it, especially because it does a good job of accenting our carbon fiber roof, and mixed with the white, you can't go wrong with the sort of Stormtrooper black and white look. In the rear here, we have the taillights. These are really cool. These actually have a holographic effect that looks really good, and something that you really won't find on any other factory cars, and it makes it look really unique. Another special feature is we have the bluing on the badge on the rear, just like we mentioned on the front. But what this does have is this has a 500h, to mention the hybrid, is actually also sort of tinted blue, just to remind you again that this car is a hybrid. So that's kind of an interesting look at the overall feature of the car. It's a really, really, really good looking car. And of course, this one being the hybrid makes it a little bit more unique with some subtle touches on the exterior. It would be hard to tell if this car was just driving by if you actually knew it was the hybrid version or not. But let's go ahead and let's start looking into the engine bay to see what it looks like and where the drivetrain multi-stage hybrid part comes from. Okay, so now we're going to be taking a look at the drivetrain system that is the multi-stage Lexus hybrid drive system inside our 2022 Lexus LC500h. First, one of the things I wanted to point out real fast here is how light this is. This is actually an aluminum hood, and it's very, very lightweight. A lot of the other panels on the front of the car are, and there are some other parts that are actually carbon composite that are also in the exterior, like our trunk lid is actually a carbon composite part. So lots of lightweight body parts on the exterior here, which is pretty interesting in terms of weight savings and even aluminum suspension components that are in the car. So let's talk about what we're looking at here. So right off the bat, looking at the engine bay, we see what is our obvious engine cover for our 3.5 liter V6, but we also have some obvious orange piping that is for the hybrid drivetrain battery system. That is the basically the national sign that this is an electric car, or features some of the electric drivetrain components, in this case a hybrid system. So let's talk about the overall specs. So the combined output of this system is 354 horsepower. So you have about 295 horsepower comes from the naturally aspirated 3.5 liter V6, and then that is mated to an electric motor. There's actually two electric motors. One is used for starting and some of the other sort of maintenance things and helping with shifting, and the other one is used for a drive motor or for power, and that one produces about 59 horsepower for that combined number, about 354 horsepower. One of the really interesting things is how the car is managing through all of that power. The transmission, part of the multi-stage hybrid system, is actually a mix of two different transmissions. It's actually a CVT transmission essentially meshed together with a 4-speed automatic transmission, and that creates this sort of mix. It's almost like, I'd liken it to semi-trucks, for example, where they're able to use the 4 speeds to run through the CVTs using a set of planetary gears that allows them to sort of change the way the car shifts. So one of the things you'll notice is while driving it, you'll actually notice some shifts are different than other shifts. There's simulated shifts that are supposed to be similar to the 10-speed that you would find in the V8 car. So that's kind of one of the interesting things in there. They made one of the important engineering aspects from Lexus was to make this car not feel like it had a CVT in it. So it does have that hybrid CVT / standard automatic transmission in it. So that's a pretty interesting fact. We have our suspension towers here, which are pretty interesting because they've obviously been reinforced. And of course, it's a very heavy-duty car. It actually features adaptive shocks in the car that can be adjusted depending on what drive modes, which we'll talk about later, you decide to use in the car. And there's a lot going on here. I can't say this is a car I'd see you working on yourself per se, but good thing this does have a Toyota Lexus warranty, and of course Toyota and Lexus are generally well known for being very reliable, so you probably won't have to worry about that. That being said, we don't have this for a long-term warranty. This is just what I'm saying based off my experience with them. And it's kind of interesting, they have a lot of these covers, but they don't cover absolutely everything in the engine bay, so you can still see a lot of what's going on here. So that's pretty interesting. Now, if you're wondering where some of these components are, you'll notice we don't have our standard battery or even all of the extra hybrid batteries. It's actually a really cool thing about that. So if I close this real fast, the hybrid batteries in the car are actually hidden in the body. So they're actually sitting right about here in the car, which means you have a lot of that weight from the hybrid battery system actually sits over the rear wheels. And this car is rear wheel drive, which means if you have more weight over the rear wheels, you're actually going to get better traction, which is a really cool feature, making this essentially one of the better performing hybrid systems, which is not something we typically think of. When we don't think of performance, we don't always think of hybrid. So this is essentially a performance hybrid, which is a really cool, interesting way of looking at the car, not to mention all of the aluminum and carbon fiber components that I mentioned earlier. But I think it's about time that we jump into the interior and start talking about everything we've got going on in there. Okay, so now we're on the interior of the 2022 Lexus LC500h. And I know the first question on your mind isn't what's cool about the interior, it's actually what on earth is that color? So let's talk about this. So this is part of our Lexus LC bespoke build, which we actually have a plaque for right here. That's kind of funny, which means we get access to this awesome color. And this color did come at a premium, but it's called Manhattan Henge Alcantara. And so it is this sort of orangey color, and it's fluid throughout the car, whether we're looking at the leather that's on the steering wheel, on some of the main components, or the Alcantara that actually goes up onto the roof here, which is good that they didn't put it anywhere like the steering wheel, because you don't want Alcantara there. If you're not wearing gloves constantly, Alcantara becomes really gross and icky over time, and so it's not something you want on your steering wheel. So well done to Lexus for not putting it there, because it looks fantastic on the roof. So that's what we've got going on there. We do have the standard sport seats, although there are some optional comfort seats you can add should you choose to go that route. But let's talk about what all we've got going in here. One of the things that is pretty straightforward is, if you are familiar with Lexus, there are a lot of standard Lexus components in this car, like our little horns that we have here up on the dash. These are our sort of standard access. We do have our driving modes over here, and then we do have traction control and snow, and a lot of this, and even the Lexus clock. So there's a lot of things that get carried over from other Lexus models that are to be expected. So if you've driven those Lexus models before, you'd feel right at home when sitting in this car. So that's a pretty interesting part there. There are some subtle changes. For example, we have some more than standard modes. Some of the basic sedans won't have Sport and Sport Plus or Comfort and Eco and all those extra modes, but they also don't have carbon fiber in their clock. So that's just a little racy reminder that you're in the LC500h Coupe, which makes it a little bit more special than some of the standard models of cars, so to speak. So let's talk about the really cool tech that goes into the interior. I want to share with you one of the most interesting things. Now, right now in Phoenix, it's actually pretty chilly in the morning. We get ice, we get all that stuff, and it's kind of cold. And one of the things I noticed was that you don't see any buttons that show any sort of sign of having seat warmers. Well, that's because this actually has the Lexus automatic climate control system. And what that does is it actually regulates all of these seats, the steering wheels, and even some of the other ventilation components of the car automatically based on your input into the climate control system and the cabin temperature and the exterior temperature, which is a really interesting mix. So they have that automatic system that's been going. So while you don't have to worry about adjusting it yourself, the car does it for you automatically. And I have to say, in our time with the car, I didn't find it doing anything I didn't like. I was always happy with what the seats were doing. The seats were warm when I wanted to be warm, and they were cool when you wanted them to be cool. So it's a really cool feature. I'm really impressed that they were able to get it to work so fluidly. So you actually get to do a dual zone climate control, so you can have your passenger separate from your driver should you want to do so. So that's totally fine. We do have some magnesium paddle shifters, which is pretty cool. I like saying the word magnesium, makes me feel like I'm a race car driver. So you do have the manual mode here available if you wanted to shift through the 10 speeds, but like I said earlier, it's actually an artificial 10 speeds, and you can feel some of the hard shifts, and most of it is simulated to feel like a different type of transmission, so that's kind of an interesting feature there. You do have a lot of luxury features, lots of buttons. You can actually turn off the heads-up display should you not want that, although I personally prefer it. I think it's a nice pleasure to have. You have a really cool gauge cluster in here that actually physically moves behind the dash whenever you mention some of the heads-up display options, which is pretty cool because you can adjust what you have both on your main screen here, and then you have your 10.3-inch display over here, which isn't really intended to be a touchscreen because you do have your Lexus touchpad here, along with some of the other control things. One of the things that I think speaks quality when you're looking at this interior, not to mention just the leatherwork, for example, and the initial impression that you get, but all of the buttons and switches that you have here all feel fantastic. A lot of these are metal, some of them are plastic, but you have a lot of access to a lot of really cool components. Like, for example, when you move this back, you do have another cup holder in here, but if you wanted to open this up, you can open this up, and there's some storage, some of your other USB options in here, but you just tap this, and the way it slides back into place. That is a very cool touch, especially all the other carbon fiber. You have the gloss carbon fiber doors here, and if you look in the door sill, you actually have a mix of what is the forged carbon fiber. You have the gloss carbon fiber door cards, and of course we have some matte carbon fiber in there as well, just reminding us of that composite carbon fiber that you have throughout the car. Even in our clock, for example, like I mentioned earlier, even the cup holders are hidden, and we have the upgraded Mark Levinson sound system. So that's actually a 13 speaker system versus the standard, I believe it's 12 Lexus speaker system that would come in the car prior to the upgrade. So that's a pretty cool touch that we have in this car as well. But the overall presence of the car feels very solid, especially in the interior. It's a car that's very comfortable and has a variety of different driving options and things like that. And we'll talk about the driving modes later, but that's just a quick quick impression, and just to touch on the back seats, this is a coupe. The back seats, while they are pretty big, there's still not really much legroom, but they would definitely fit things like a dog. Perfect for groceries, even though you do have a bit of a trunk if you needed it, and you could definitely fit kids in a pinch or very small children. So that's what it's there for, but it's not the most practical back seat for adults. But let's be honest, you're probably not buying a coupe if you wanted something for that anyways. But that's a quick look at the interior of the 2022 Lexus LC500h. Okay, so now we're sitting inside of the 2022 Lexus LC500h, and that's because we're going to start talking about some of the driving dynamics while driving the car. How fitting, right? But first of all, you'll notice it's pretty quiet in the cabin. And that's because currently the engine's not running despite the car idling, it shuts it off. But we actually have an EV mode. So this is a hybrid, and it's not a plug-in hybrid, but you can actually drive the car on EV mode only. So let's do that for a sec. And then it'll kick out eventually if it doesn't feel like it has the power. Really, it's only got a few miles of range tops. But again, it's not really an EV, it's not an electric car. It's not trying to be that way. It just has this little pseudo EV mode should you want to use it. Mostly the electric part of the car is supposed to help with gas mileage and such, and not so much helping with some of the actual EV only options per se, just helping with the gas variety. One of the other interesting things about the LC500h is the fact that the gas tank on this car is actually slightly bigger than the V8, which seems kind of ironic. You think the V8 car would have a bigger gas tank, but nonetheless, you get a bigger range by buying the LC500h than you would with the standard LC500, so that's a pretty cool feature. Let's move on to probably one of the most important things, which I think is talking about some of the drive modes in the car. So the car having that adaptive electronic suspension, they're not airbags that are in the car, actually does a lot to change the way it handles, especially because all of the technology in the transmission even allows you to change a lot of what can be done in the car. So starting with the standard or regular drive modes, we have normal and custom. So obviously custom, as it sounds, you are able to adjust it any way you choose. The normal drive mode is just your standard, pretty much best of everything. You really can't go wrong with the normal drive mode. It's pretty balanced. Lexus says they prefer this option for city driving, and it's what's to be expected. Now, if you push the knob down once, you'll then move to comfort mode, and I think that's where this car really sits best most of the time. Comfort mode changes the suspension to make it a bit more comfortable. It unlocks any restrictions that'll be on the climate control system and makes it just a general, more enjoyable cruising experience that I think is especially suited to either city driving, where you might have rough roads, or long road trips and things like that, where you might need your climate control system and you just want everything to be working optimally and just enjoy yourself and relax a bit. If you go one more down from that, you get to Eco Mode. Eco Mode is a really interesting one because what that does is that actually, obviously, is the sole goal of getting better gas mileage. So what that does is that electronically limits how fast the car will let you accelerate, so it manages the throttle essentially. It'll slow you down so you drive very slow as if you were driving another Toyota product, a Prius, but it'll make sure that you get better gas mileage in that sense. Another thing that it does is it actually limits the climate control system. It'll throttle back the climate control system if it feels like it can do that to get better gas mileage. So that's something to be wary of. For example, here in Phoenix, we can reach temperatures as high as 120 degrees during summer. So you may not want to be using eco mode when your air conditioning could be getting shut off due to the fact that it's trying to save fuel economy. Just some food for thought. So kind of an interesting eco mode if you want your better gas mileage. It does exist on the car. Makes sense because it is the hybrid drivetrain after all. Now let's go to the what happens if you move the modes up. So that brings us to our sport modes. We have sport and then we have sport plus. So sport does adjust the shifting, makes the car feel more lively by adjusting some of the transmission shift points and things like that, just to make it feel a little bit more dynamic, so to speak. But where the car really comes alive is actually in sport plus. If you put the car in Sport Plus, the steering wheel actually feels heavier, which makes it a little bit easier to be a little bit more direct because you can feel more accurate with it as opposed to being a little bit more overboosted style steering. It also adjusts the suspension to make it a little bit stiffer and could be best to be enjoyed while driving through things like curvy canyon roads and such like that. Is probably the best way to manage that type of mode for the car. Another thing it does and it actually makes the shift points more aggressive than the standard sport mode, so it's essentially one step up. The Sport Plus is way more aggressive than the standard sport mode. It also reduces some of the other driving aids and some of those management systems, which is pretty interesting. This car does have a heads-up display I mentioned earlier that does have a lot of your standard RPM gauges and speedometers. It has your standard Lexus safety system that comes with a lot of the driving aids, like the lines, the guidance lines. It has the cruise control where you can adjust all that, all of the standard luxury features that you would expect to find in a car like this. Now, as far as the driving feature, I mentioned earlier that this car weighs a little over 4,400 pounds. You don't really notice the weight while driving the car. It actually feels pretty lightweight. All in all, it's very responsive. And especially when you decide to get on the car, maybe using one of those sporty modes per se, the car does a good job of getting up and going. And again, I think a lot of that has to do with the way that the weight was distributed through the car, including putting those hybrid batteries over the rear wheels. So even with traction control off, this car doesn't really break loose, which is a pretty cool thing. It has plenty of get up and go. The 0 to 60 for this car, it'll do 0 to 60 in a little over 5 seconds. And so that's very quick. It's not breakneck performance fast, but it's definitely faster than most cars on the road fast. So should you ever need to pass somebody, should you ever need going uphill, whatever it is, this car will have no problem doing that. The other thing I like is that the paddle shifters are actually attached to the wheel. Sometimes they attach them to the steering column. I'm not usually a huge fan of that, so it's nice that you can kind of access them whenever. But let's talk about the transmission for a sec. One of the interesting things about that transmission, I mentioned it's a hybrid system between a 4-speed and a CVT. The weird part about that system is that you can actually feel different types of shifts sometimes. Now, you won't notice it if you're not paying attention. They did a good job of making it very, very subtle, and it doesn't feel like you're driving a CVT at all either, which is fantastic. No rubber banding or weird effects like that. The car is really smooth, but you do notice sometimes you'll have a little bit of what feels like your normal automatic shift. And then sometimes you notice the simulated one where you'll hear the subtle audio change, but not so much of an actual shift. So that's kind of an interesting one. We're going to be getting on the freeway here shortly, and then you'll be able to hear a little bit of what the car sounds like fully underway, which can feel kind of underwhelming sometimes. I'm not a huge fan of the sound of this car, but I'll let you guys keep your own opinions for what you think of that 3.5 liter V6 sound. Usually when you're using a lot of the EV modes, it sounds more like a spaceship, which is kind of pretty interesting. The other thing that's pretty nice, as I mentioned earlier while talking about the interior, is how much adjustability you have in terms of your driver displayed aids. Get over here, all right. Okay, so it's pretty fast. Gets to freeway speed in no time. You can definitely get yourself in trouble with this car. So you do need to be a little bit careful in that sense. But I'm not a huge fan of the way the car sounds. I think it's a little underwhelming. Obviously, there's some piped sound into the interior as well. But it certainly moves. In terms of performance, there's no lack of performance. This is a performance hybrid vehicle that also offers some gas mileage benefits. You're looking at about 26 city and about 34 highway, which I found, I wasn't taking it easy on this car by any means, but found myself usually sitting between those numbers at any time during our time with the car. So I definitely believe those numbers. And so you'll get better gas mileage than you will with these standard V8 cars, while you still get all of your looks and all of the awesome assertiveness that comes with being a driver of a Lexus LC500h. So it's a very fast, punchy car full of lots of carbon fiber and aluminum. It has a lot of heavy engineering attributes. Everything in the car feels like quality. I don't think that you can go wrong with checking out a car like this, especially if you're looking for a Grand Tour that offers a little bit of everything. If you want a one car that does everything really well and you can do a coupe, this is a really interesting example, especially because there's not many cars in this space, especially those that are hybrids around this price point. So that makes for a really interesting car that's really one of its own and offers a lot of customizability. If you're a fan of Lexus, you'll definitely be a fan of the LC500h. So if you are interested in checking out a car like this, not to mention some of the upgrades that are necessary, like the Mark Levinson sound system should be necessary in any Lexus because it sounds absolutely fantastic. And that's no exception in this car. So with that, that's going to be the end of the video. If you are interested in checking out the LC500h, go ahead and go to your local Lexus dealer or mess around with the online configurator. You have a ton of cool colors and options that you can actually mess with, or even do your own bespoke build with the car if you wanted to do so. If you guys enjoyed this video, could smash that like button for us. We really appreciate it. And get subscribed for more content like this in the future. Thank you so much for watching, guys.